I know it's hard to understand it and maybe harsh, what I say now. Diaspora is over. It's over. There is no future.
Welcome to The Honest Take, the show that goes past the headlines to find out what's actually true about Israel and the people covering it. I'm Ben Chertoff, and my guest today is Brigadier General Amir Avivi, a 30-year veteran of the IDF who built Israel's largest movement of security professionals and who wrote the book on a war that was coming 6 months before it came. Every American of a certain age remembers exactly where they were on the morning of September 11th. For Israelis, that morning was October 7th. Amir Avivi saw it coming. Deputy Commander of the Gaza Division, Chief of Staff to the Defense Minister, and 6 months before Hamas broke through the fence on October 7th, he published a book called No Retreat that laid out the war that was coming, almost to the letter. Nobody in power listened. He'll tell you why, and it goes back to a Cold War idea most Israelis can't stand. This is a conversation for anyone who's ever looked at a map of Israel and not quite understood what they were looking at. A country 45 miles wide, 9 of them along the coast, where the hills your enemies want are close enough to see from the airport. We get into how Hamas actually came to power, why Avivi says Israel can never simply walk away from the West Bank, and his answer to a question most people won't ask out loud. What is the real solution to anti-Semitism? Some of what he says is going to be hard to hear. That's rather the point. General Avivi, welcome to The Honest Take.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
General, I want to start not with policy, but with a feeling my American audience actually lived through. For us, there was a morning, September 11th, when the thing we told ourselves could never reach us did. October 7th was that morning for Israelis. You were a career soldier watching it unfold in real time. Can you take me through what you remembered of that day? Every American who lived through 9/11 remembers that first hour where they were. For you, what did you understand in your gut that day that the rest of the world didn't?
So in order to explain that, we have to put things in context. You know, when I retired after 30 years of military service, I felt that there is something deeply wrong, in the way the military leadership and the leaders of the nation were looking at our national security. I felt we were in a very big danger. And, we'll elaborate later on how did I get to these conclusions. But this is what I was feeling. And I felt that, the national security, I would say, atmosphere in Israel was dominated by generals that for many years pushed policies of concessions, retreats, weakness, in a way, post-Zionism. And I knew that, most of the officers don't think like that. They're staunch Zionists, they're winners, they understand the issues on the ground. They were not organized. And several years before the 7th of October in 2020, in January 2020, I established a new movement and think tank, or do tank, to really change, this reality, to bring an understanding of the challenges. And through the activities of this new organization, known in Hebrew as Abitchonistim, in English as IDSF, Israel Defense and Security Forum, 2 years before the war, we already understood that war is coming. And we wrote a very extensive national security assessment describing this war that is going to come, and saying we have only 2 choices, or a 6-day war scenario or a Yom Kippur scenario. We need to choose. It's either we will be proactive and will attack first, or we are going to be attacked by surprise. So in this context of somebody who is leading or led at the time, a big movement that saw this coming, saw this war coming, and not only produced a very extensive national security assessment that was presented to the previous government and this government, and Mossad and the president and so on. But based on this assessment, I also wrote a book, No Retreat. It was published 6 months before the war, describing the whole war that is going to come and what will happen after the war and what is the long-term vision to secure Israel. So at 6:30 in the morning, when my wife, Anat, who volunteers as an ambulance driver, so she started getting messages, from Madda, from the Israeli equivalent of the Red Cross, again, David Adom, that, something big is happening. And because she knew all our assessments, when she woke me up at 6:30 in the morning, she said, Amir, the war started. We're in a war. The first thing that went through my mind is, it took me a minute to understand that it's Hamas attacking. And the first thing that went through my mind is, why isn't Hezbollah attacking? Iran, Palestinians, Judean Samaria, Israeli Arabs. We foresaw an attack, a simultaneous attack from all fronts. And what surprised me, it's not that there was an attack, because this we foresaw. It surprised me that it's Hamas attacking alone.
Yeah.
The second thought that went through my mind was, okay, what are Hamas thinking? I mean, what are they doing? I mean, it's crazy. Yes, they surprised us. It's a big surprise. Of course, I was also surprised that with all the intelligence we have, with all our capabilities, the army didn't see it coming. This surprised me a lot. I mean, there's a difference between the fact that we knew that there was a deeply wrong kind of thinking in the Israeli establishment about their intentions and what they want to do, but you wouldn't expect a reality where 4,000 or 5,000 Nukhbas are getting ready to storm Israel, and we don't know about that. It's crazy.
Right.
So this surprised me. But I can tell you that 2, 3, 4 hours into the war, when we assessed the situation after talking to the commander of the North and making sure, they mobilized the whole army to the north to make sure that Hezbollah doesn't go in. And when we understood that Judean Samaria is under control, Israeli Arabs are not shooting, Iran is not shooting, it's just Hamas. When we assessed the situation 4 hours into the war, my organization, we knew we were going to win. And this is an understanding nobody had. Everybody was in a complete shock. The government, the society, the army, the Shin Bet, everybody was shocked. And we said, that's it, we're going to win. Because the moment it was just Hamas, we knew at that moment it will take us a day, 2, 3, to kill all of them on our side, push them back to Gaza. Now we're mobilizing hundreds of thousands of soldiers, to the reserve. And we knew when this war machine of Israel will start moving, it will accelerate and accelerate and accelerate to the point where once we are in full scale, there is no force on earth that can stop us. We knew it's going to be a very long war. We knew it will take years, but we also knew that in a way, in a very terrible way, devastating way, Israel was saved, because when we put this assessment, talking about this upcoming war, we put on the cover of this assessment a picture of a frog being boiled in a pot. And we said, this is Israel. Israel is dying. We saw 4 major challenges that Israel and the Jewish people were facing, and none of them were taken care of. One is this big war, Iran and all its proxies. So basically, this whole war we're talking about now, one threat out of 4, which we outlined in our assessment. The second threat, we talked about the challenge that is inside the land of Israel, in the Negev, in the Galil, in Judean Samaria, everything that's going on inside the borders of the land of Israel. It's a huge challenge, which is not taken care of. We talked at length about delegitimation and anti-Semitism 2 years before the war.
Wow.
We looked at anti-Semitism and delegitimation as an existential threat to Israel and the Jewish people 2 years before the war. And last but not least, we talked about our problem with our identity, the fact that Jews are distancing from core Jewish Zionist values. Mm-hmm. We foresaw, the social crisis. We said because there is no common vision, this is bringing friction into the society, but also in the relationship between Israelis and the diaspora. Mm-hmm. It's all about, our identity, our connection to our ethos as a nation. Mm-hmm. And we said, and I said it in the book 2 years before the war, we need to go back to be the heroes of our own story, not the villains in our own story. We forgot we are the heroes.
What does it feel like to have had a really prescient view of what was going to happen and then to see it actually happen?
Look, that morning I felt three different emotions at the same time. One, I was really angry on our decision makers. We told them, we showed them this assessment. We told them exactly what's going to happen. Now, this is not just giving someone a paper. I brought with me to every meeting 10, 12 generals. We sat in front of all these decision makers. We explained at length what's going to happen. They cannot say they didn't know. Mm-hmm. We did conventions. We did videos. We put a lot of effort. They didn't listen. And by the way, I write in the book 6 months before the war why they're not listening. Mm-hmm. It's also something that bothered me because, we're telling them war is coming. They were not listening. So I talk about what we call in Hebrew the conceptia, the reason why, they were not willing to deal with reality. Mm-hmm.
What was that reason?
So basically, Israel in a way, not formally, but practically embraced the American doctrine against the USSR. In 1946, after the Second World War, the US asked itself, okay, how are we going to deal with the USSR? It's a big threat. And in 1946, the US embraces a doctrine, and they call this doctrine containment. Mm-hmm. When you say to Israelis containment, they get crazy. They hate this word, hate it. And they are lamenting all the time, why are we containing? What is this containment? Containment is when you talk what is the conceptia, Israelis will tell you containment. But for the US, it worked amazingly well. The US decided not to confront directly the USSR, but to deal with them where they are trying to expand, whether it's North Korea, Vietnam, Cuba. And then the US added another element, which was very crucial, space and military race, thinking that the USSR is not going to be able to cope with this, because the USSR had a communist economy, not advanced one, and the US was a very advanced economy. And indeed, an amazing thing happens. At the end of the 80s, the USSR collapses without even one bullet being shot at them. Amazing, amazing success for a doctrine that's based on containment. Mm-hmm. Now, what happened in Israel? Same thing. The government said, and the army and so on, we don't want a big war. We want to avoid a war. So let's contain it. If we need to do a pinpointed operation in Gaza or somewhere else, okay, we'll contain this. We're not going to do big wars. And at the same time, we'll develop our economy. High-tech will boom. Tourism, Israeli GDP per capita went from $15,000 all the way to $55,000. Now it's almost $60,000 or $70,000. And at the same time, something amazing happened. The reality in the Arab world, became very, very problematic. You had the Arab Spring. We saw country after country, the Arab world collapsing completely, economically, socially, militarily. Egypt, Syria, Iraq, Yemen, Libya, all these places collapsing. And then, our government and the security establishment, they look at this reality and they say, look, it's working exactly the same. It worked for the US. We are thriving, we are developing, we are growing. We're avoiding big wars, and they are collapsing. And it's just a matter of time. If we just manage to push these wars away a bit more, you'll see at the end of the day, Hamas will collapse, Hezbollah will collapse, Iran will collapse. They're all in a really bad shape. They really wanted to believe that this will continue. And I think the difference between us in IDSF and the government and the military and so on is we saw the shift. We saw the moment where we knew this is not going to work anymore. There was a period of time where I was thinking, yes, it's working for us. But then there were huge global and regional changes that brought us to the conclusion that that's it. This is not going to work anymore. And recognizing the moment of shift, it's very, very hard because human nature is wanting to believe that what has been working well for a long time will continue to work well. This is how human beings, even the best businessmen in the world, usually when they see, the stock market going up and up and up and up, they say, okay, the rally will continue, It's bullish, it will continue being bullish. And it doesn't work like that. There is always a collapse at the end of the day. And most of the people, even the most able ones, they don't see it coming.
What do you think for you, what was the change, the global change and shift that you saw that shattered the containment fantasy for you?
So, we've seen for many years American dominance in the Middle East. America was strongly present in Iraq, in Afghanistan, and projected its power in the region. But I think that from President Obama and all the way to President Biden, American leadership, global leadership started diminishing more and more. And one of the defining moments was the withdrawal from Afghanistan. When the U.S. withdrew the way it did, and Afghanistan went back 20 years back, immediately, all the achievements were erased in a day. This sent a very strong message globally to Russia, to China, but also to Iran and to the Middle East overall. The U.S. is done. Is weak, is retreating. They lost willingness to fight. What does it matter how many capabilities and technologies you have if you don't have the will to use them? And the feeling at that time was, that's it. The U.S. is done. And this, by the way, encouraged the Russians to invade Ukraine. A strong U.S., a reality of a strong U.S. would have prevented certain invasion. They wouldn't dare. But U.S. was perceived, at a very weak moment. And then you saw Russia attacking. And at the same time, because of the dynamics of the Russian-Ukrainian war, suddenly you saw a Chinese-Russian-Iranian front emerging in the Middle East. An alignment between China, Russia, and Iran. Iran, at that period of time, really reached, after many, many years, a serious buildup of capabilities. Suddenly, they are backed up by China and Russia. America is withdrawing. And at the same time, looking at Israel, complete mess. 5 consecutive elections, a society that seems broken, a political system that is not functioning. And when we connected all these dots, we said, okay, that's it. We're on our way to the war. And we said, look, this war might start in several ways. One way is that we get to the conclusion, that's it, we cannot wait anymore. Iran is moving towards nuclear weapons, and we need to attack. And it was obvious that if we attack, then the whole ecosystem of Iran will attack us back. And this is going to be a multi-front war. The other option was that they see us in our weakness, and they will say, okay, this is our moment. Now let's attack Israel. And the attack, we expected to see a simultaneous attack. And it could have been certain, local operation that, brings us to a whole war. So one way or another, it didn't matter which scenario will happen. It was obvious that we were going to war. To us, it was obvious. So on the 7th of October, I wasn't surprised that the war started. I was surprised the way it started.
Right.
The fact that it was only Hamas. And I can tell you...
Why was that? I mean, Hamas had expected involvement from Hezbollah. Why did that not happen? Was that just a massive miscalculation?
It's very hard to say. That morning I was thinking that I said, okay, Iran is launching Hamas to an attack in order to stop the normalization between Saudi Arabia and Israel. Mm-hmm. It was obvious that once we were about to achieve normalization, this was a huge, huge threat to Iran. So they said, okay, we'll disrupt this. We'll launch an attack. And I was thinking maybe Iran wants to keep Hezbollah intact because they don't want to lose both proxies. They need strategic depth. And then another option came to the table, which was that Iran knew how penetrated Hezbollah was. And they said, if we let Hezbollah know all the plans, then Israel will know that something is happening because they have much more intelligence on Hezbollah than Hamas. Mm-hmm. But then it might be some kind of, lack of tactic coordination. Hamas went to attack too fast and, Hezbollah wasn't ready. It's not clear, but the fact that it was just Hamas, this changed everything. This gave Israel a huge opportunity at that moment. Right. And I can tell you that, during the day after we assessed the situation and we were working to save people in Gaza and making sure that the army also secures the north and Judea and Samaria, at a certain point, my deputy in IDSF, Yaron Buskila, who is the chief operation officer of the Gaza division in reserve, he came to the Gaza division. The division was conquered by Hamas. They sent him to open an alternative headquarters. And I said to him, Yaron, I'm on my way. He said, no, listen. You have to go now to national TV. If you don't speak to the people of Israel this morning, this country today is going to collapse. Nobody is talking to them. So I went to the TV station, all of them, all the major TV stations on the 7th of October, and from that day, almost every day. And, I came to the station, everybody was in a complete shock. And they look at me, I'm the general, And I said, look, guys, yes, it's a very difficult moment. It's devastating. The sights from Gaza are terrible. But I want you to know the strategic situation. We secured the north, we secured Judea and Samaria, we secured our internal situation. We're fighting in Gaza. I'm telling you now, it won't take us more than 2 or 3 days to kill all of them on our side. We'll push them back to Gaza. And from that moment onwards, we're taking the initiative. Hundreds of thousands of Israeli soldiers are on the way to the borders and the units. And when we will take the initiative, this war eventually will end with a decisive win on all fronts. Mm-hmm. Yes, it's a very big crisis, but it's a big opportunity and we're going to seize it. We're going to win this war. And this message was very, very, very important to the Israeli nation. And many people, when I walk in the streets, people come to me and say, Amir, you saved us. It's really what made the difference, in the first few days when we said, guys, we're going to win. Yes, it's hard, but, it was amazing to me to see many generals and public figures that after the 7th of October stayed in the 6th of October with the same petty discussions, with the same politics, Bibi, not Bibi. They didn't rise to the moment. I could have come on the 7th of October to the TV with my assessment and my book and said, I told you so. You didn't listen to us. You need to resign.
Right.
I didn't do that. I said it's not relevant. Well, what's the relevance now? As much as I was angry on all the decision makers in the army and in the government, it's not what's not relevant.
Right.
We need to empower them now. We need to win the war. So I gave a message of hope, not dealing with attacking them. You asked me how I felt that day. So one thing, really, I felt really angry about all this politics.
Yeah.
But also, there are officers, generals that are born for everyday stuff in the army, and there are officers and generals that were born for war. Mm-hmm. And we are the kind of people that were born for this moment. Mm-hmm. And when we see a crisis like that, we feel full of spirit. We feel that, this is a defining moment. We feel empowered. We feel that, we have to do big things. We have to win. And not small kind of feelings, So I felt, okay, this is a historical, I would say even biblical moment. And I understood how big this moment is, But I must tell you, I also felt, I felt guilty. Yeah. I felt that, I'm one of the few people that actually knew war is coming. So yes, I built a movement and I wrote, national security assessment, and I wrote a book and I presented it to many people and I did videos. But I all the time felt on the 7th of October, I didn't do enough. I felt that I probably could have done more, shouted more, I felt like powerless. I felt, that I was thinking to myself, what could you have done more to really, really make, the government understand, the army understand that war is coming. They were not listening, and I couldn't, not feel that maybe we could have done more.
Can you, before we get into the forward-looking policy issues, I think it's really important, especially for an American listener who hasn't been to Israel, to understand how compact the country is, especially when you're talking about the idea of containment. I think a lot of the audience in America has a longer daily commute than the width of the country in some areas. What's it like to raise kids and live your whole life in a place where you can see really, like you land in Ben Gurion, you can see the West Bank, where you can see where the threats are from your house, where soldiers go home on the weekends?
To compare it, to the U.S., it's like living in Manhattan and seeing the other side of the Hudson. And your enemy is exactly on the other side, even closer. And it's not a canal or sea that's between you. It's just a few hundred yards between 50,000 murderous terrorists with rockets, anti-tank missiles, and drones, and improvised explosive devices in your towns. And these people, they just one thing. They want to annihilate you. They want to kill you. Looking at the land of Israel, the width of the whole land, all of it, with Judea and Samaria, what people call the West Bank, from the shores of Tel Aviv to the Jordan Valley, to the border with the state of Jordan, it's 45 miles. It's not even a city. This is the land of Israel, 45 miles.
Yep.
And, it's 9 miles of shore, 9 miles of Jordan Valley, and the rest of the land of Israel is the mountains of Judea and Samaria. So basically, the land of Israel is the mountains of Judea and Samaria with a bit of margin. That's it.
Yeah.
The whole land. This is why all the history of the Jews is on the mountains. If you are not on the mountains, you cannot exist.
So you've described your worldview as absolute security control. Can you give me a one-sentence version? What does absolute security control mean, and what does it cost?
Okay, so first, when we talk about Israel's national security, the most important thing for me, in national security is understanding that national security is first and foremost about national values. It's about our deep connection to Judaism and Zionism. It's a sense of rightness. The biggest issue is the will. We talked about the U.S. What happens with a country that has endless amount of capabilities and zero will to use it. Okay? National security starts with a sense of purpose. And the sense of purpose comes from the connection to our Jewish Zionist values. And this sense of purpose is the fuel for will. Once you have a sense of purpose, you have the will to endure many challenges, throughout the years. So we work a lot on the issue of the spirit. It's all about spirit. Okay, this is the most important weapon that you have, and this is first understanding. The second understanding is that Israel, and I wrote about it in the book before the war. Now the Prime Minister talks about it almost every week. Israel must be able to defend itself by itself. Mm-hmm. We cannot rely on anybody. Yes, we need partners. Yes, the US is our biggest friend. But when it comes to our existence, we need to be able to have huge military industries, produce our own munitions, have an army big enough to endure long wars, have energy independence, have as much as possible food independence, certainly ability to produce the critical things we need for war. We're not going to be like disconnected from the war, but again, you never know what will happen. You have to have these capabilities. And then you need to reside along defensible borders. And the minimal defensible borders are the land of Israel, are the Jordan Valley, the Golan Heights. And we need to control all the perimeter around Israel. So Jordan Valley is on one side, but Philadelphia and the Egyptian border on the other side. Mm-hmm. And we need to be overall, only Israel can have an army inside the land of Israel. Because again, 45 miles, you cannot have another army inside 45 miles. When I talk about solutions, before I talk about solutions, I talk about the methodology, how to think about it. And what I suggest is 4 steps. Step 1, don't mix your values with problem solving. You cannot put a hole in the holistic idea of Judaism and Zionism in order to solve a problem. So our holistic idea is very clear. We are the people of Israel. This is the land of Israel. It's our land. We are the ancestral people of this land. We are the indigenous people of this land. And we're not trading our values for problem solving. This is our basic values. We're not coming and saying we are occupiers in our own land. No, we're not. This is our land. Okay? So you don't mix up your values with problem solving. It doesn't mean, by the way, you disregard problems. It doesn't mean you don't look at reality and try to solve problems. But you don't need to sell your identity to solve problems. It's 2 different things. You don't mix values with problems. Mm-hmm. So that's, if you are not aligned here, we already have nothing relevant to discuss. Because if we are occupiers in our own land, okay, so maybe we shouldn't be here. If we are, according to some people, Europeans that came to a place that doesn't belong to us, the conclusion will be we have to go back to Europe, right? What are we doing here? So you don't mix your values. Second thing is you don't talk about them before you are able to define clearly what are your red lines, or in other words, what is needed to secure Israel for generations to come, looking 1,000 years ahead, not 10 years ahead, 1,000 years ahead. I always say that a nation that has been around 4,000 years needs to at least be able to think 1,000 years ahead. Nobody knows what dangers there will be, what technologies, what empires will rise. Nobody knows anything. So the way you approach it is you have to say, okay, I don't know what the future holds, but let's look at really dramatic scenarios. How do I survive it? Now, when you have a nation that has been expelled from its land 4 times, Assyrians, Babylonians, Romans, Muslims, 2,000 years in the diaspora, persecuted, thrown from place to place, humiliated. 1/3 of our people were exterminated on European land in the Holocaust, in concentration camps. you would expect that a nation like that will put a huge, huge effort in answering the question, what is needed to secure Israel for generations to come? Mm-hmm. And it's amazing that before the creation of IDSF, before I founded this movement, there was not a single think tank, research department, government that answered this question. Mm-hmm. How can it be? We're expelled 4 times. We are experiencing endless wars and operations, and nobody is taking seriously the question, what is needed to secure Israel for generations to come? Now, only when you answer this question, then you set the parameters of what can be a solution or cannot be a solution. What are your red lines? Israel has no red lines. Mm-hmm. And we need to define them. And this is what I've been doing in the last few years, defining the red lines, mm-hmm. the minimal red lines needed for us to exist.
What are those red lines?
So basically, Israel cannot be smaller than the land of Israel. Mm-hmm. These 45 miles are the minimum for existence. That's the minimum, not the maximum. Maximum might be more, mm-hmm. but the minimum. So this brings us to the next step. The next step is defining the problem. So mm-hmm. you have people saying, look, the problem is that you guys are occupiers. So retreat. End the occupation. That's it. The problem will be solved. Very easy, right?
Right.
Well, I don't think it's a good definition of the problem, okay? I think that the problem is, how do you bridge between our national security needs to exist on the mountains of Judea and Samaria and in the Jordan Valley and even in Gaza and other places, and at the same time find a solution that is according to international law and doesn't require annexing 2, 3, or 4 million Palestinians. Mm-hmm. So you want to be secure, you want to be connected to your heritage and history, and live along the Bible Belt and in the places that are important to you. Because this is not just about hardcore security. This is about spirit. If you disregard your history, your Bible, and everything, you won't exist. There will be no spirit. So you have to bridge between these two needs. You need to be connected to your heritage and history and be secure. And you need to find a solution, not to annex all these people, and find a solution that adheres to international law. Not what people think is international law, real international law. Right. Okay? So this issue fascinates me. For years I've been dealing with this. I wrote in my book 4 different solutions to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. In all of them, I don't undermine not our history, not our heritage, and not our security. So what I found out is that while our national security needs are very, very rigid, statecraft is almost endlessly flexible. There are many, many solutions according to international law which can be applied. It's very flexible. And we need to adjust, the right solution. And there is never one solution to a problem. You always have several possible solutions that might be, put forward. And I was always asked, okay, what's your favorite solution? I said, no, it's a matter of context, depends on reality on the ground. So we need to bridge between these 2 issues.
So there is, and you talked about this you touched on it for a moment, there is, especially in the West, this sense of, why don't you just leave Judea and Samaria? Why don't you just leave the West Bank and leave it to the Palestinian Authority, and everything will be fine. That'll solve everything. Yeah,
so they're basically
what would happen?
They're basically calling for the complete annihilation and destruction of Israel. Mm-hmm. Israel cannot exist on the shore in a country with the width of 9 miles. I don't know any country that can exist in 9 miles on the shore. And again, sometimes I hear even from parts of the Israeli left. But one day we'll find a Palestinian Ben Gurion who will really, really mean peace, And I'm saying, listen, guys, this is not relevant, because the question is not if we'll have 10 or 20 years of peace. Mm-hmm. The question is what happens when you don't have peace. Now, look, I was, Deputy Division Commander of the Gaza Strip. I served there twice. And I remember, when I was Deputy Division Commander, there were many groups coming to visit. They were sending me to brief them. We used to stand in a site called Black Arrow, overlooking the north part of Gaza. And it was always the same. We would stand there, and then I was a colonel at the time. They would ask me, Colonel, what's going on in Gaza? And I would say to them, basically from the day of the judges in the Bible, same thing. Mm-hmm. The Gazans attack us. We bring the people, we fight back again and again and again. When you read the book of Judges, Samson, and all these famous stories, and you look at the reality today, you get to the conclusion nothing changed. Same dynamics, But at the end of the book of Judges, after many wars with the Gazans of that time, it said, and the land was quiet for 40 years. And our rabbis asked, why does the Bible need to state that? Every word in the Bible has a meaning. And the answer was that 40 years of quiet in the land of Israel is an event of biblical dimension. It never happened in 4,000 years. So when we think about national security and the existence of the Jewish people in their homeland, when you want a solution, the question you need to ask yourself, once there is war, is this solution viable or not? Not peace, war. Because human history is paved with much more wars than peace times, And war will come one day, okay? Mm-hmm. Even if you think that you reach 40 years of quiet. So you need solutions that will stand, even if there is a very big war. And without Judea and Samaria, we cannot exist. Not spiritually, not physically, not in any form.
You were on the ground in Gaza way before the withdrawal. I mean, I've heard you talk about being there in '96 when, after Oslo, security forces pulled out of the cities and they weren't going to operate in the cities, and that left a power vacuum. I mean, I think you've explained that that's an analog for what would happen in the West Bank if there was just a sudden withdrawal. But can you explain for American audiences who really don't understand the history of the withdrawal of Israeli forces from Gaza, what happened and what you saw?
Okay, so Israel liberated Gaza from the Egyptians in 1967. Mm-hmm. From 1967 all the way to Oslo in 1994, Gaza was at the Stone Age, literally. It posed no danger to Israel. Mm-hmm. Yes, we had in 1987 the first Intifada, but again, there were throwing stones. It was occasionally there was maybe a local terror attack, but really, as a whole, Gaza was not a strategic issue. And this is why, by the way, in Oslo, when Israel had to do some kind of take a decision where you want to take chances, they said Gaza and Jericho first. Why? Because Gaza was a non-issue. A non-issue. It wasn't considered a problematic place. Mm-hmm. So when Israel did risk management, they said, let's start in the places which are less problematic. And in 1994, the way we managed the risk, we said the road of Philadelphia, the border with Egypt, we're going to keep it. We're not going to evacuate any Jews. We stayed in Gush Katif and Netzarim and the northern towns inside the Gaza Strip. We did only one thing. We retreated from the cities, Khan Yunis, Rafah, Gaza, Ibalia, all these places. We handed them over to the new created Palestinian Authority that was based on a vicious, terrible terror organization, the PLO, the Palestinian Liberation Organization. We basically gave this terror organization a control over the Gazans and the Gazan cities. And we said to them, look, this is yours. You take care of security. We're not going in anymore. We're not going to be proactive inside the cities. This is yours. 2 years later, they launched a huge attack on us. They killed the deputy division commander, many officers, and then there was an understanding that something really wrong is going on. And a part of this process of rethinking about how Gaza division should look, they brought me to be the engineer officer of the Gaza division under the commander of the division commander, Yoav Gallant, who later on became the defense minister. When I arrived in 1997, 3 years after Oslo, in the first week, I came to serve inside Gaza in the division. I was shocked because I found out I have to deal with a threat, which I never heard about, a new threat, and this threat is tunnels. It turns out that a minute after we left the cities, immediately they started digging tunnels between this Rafah, Gazan side of Rafah to the Egyptian side of Rafah. It's very close. It's like 100, 200 meters. There is a road between these two parts of Rafah, one on the Egyptian side, one on the...
This is almost a decade, or more than a decade, before Hamas took over Gaza.
And this was not Hamas. This was the Palestinian Authority doing that. And in the 2 years I was the chief combat engineer officer, we found 35 tunnels already on Philadelphia. And as we were dealing with this new phenomena, we started seeing things flying out of the cities and falling, flying and falling, and we understood that this Palestinian Authority, inside the cities we are not operating in because we handed them over, they are building a massive military infrastructure of rockets, missiles, and mortars. And this took Gaza in 7 years from literally the Stone Age to shooting rockets at Israel. 1994, Oslo was implemented. 2001, first rockets were shot at Israel from Gaza. And this is in a reality where formally we are on Philadelphia, our towns are still inside Gaza. Only one thing we didn't do, we didn't operate in the cities. And by the way, 3 years later, 10 years after Oslo, when I became aide-de-camp of the Chief of General Staff, Moshe Bogi Ya'alon, complete loss of control of the Gaza Strip. We went from a reality where 10 years before, 6 soldiers could walk in the middle of Gaza City, to a reality of whole brigades with tanks, with APCs, with snipers, with drones, fighting a huge fight in the outskirts of these cities, and we could not contain the level of terror that was emanating from the Gaza Strip. And this change happened in 10 years, and this is in a place on the side, very small, shallow, on the sea. This is not the mountains of Judea and Samaria. If something like that would have happened on the mountains of Judea and Samaria, it would have been game over. That's it. We couldn't even reverse it. You would need 20 IDF, which we don't have. Look, Gaza is nothing. And we have been spending 3 years with the whole IDF fighting the huge infrastructure they build inside Gaza. And again, it's a shallow, small place on the side. Fighting the same fight in the huge area of Judea and Samaria with mountains 1,000 meters high, it would have been game over for us.
Right. Are there tunnels in? Do we know of the possibility of tunnels in Judea and Samaria? That level of militarization.
They cannot do the same thing because in Judea and Samaria we operate now on a daily basis with foil terror attacks. We go in now. It's not that they don't try to build the underground infrastructure. They do. But when you operate freely, you have freedom of operation to foil any terror infrastructure, any buildup. It's a whole different reality. And I'm not saying there's a huge challenge, especially emanating from I would say from the PLO army, which they have today in Judea and Samaria. We let them build the whole army inside. which is very dangerous to us, because the moment they decide to attack us, then they have many capabilities. The Palestinian Authority today has a mini army. It's more dangerous to me than any terror cell in Judea and Samaria, which we know how to foil and deal with. So it's a different kind of threat.
So I want to talk about the other threat that you talked about, you touched on earlier, which is the global rise in anti-Semitism. What is your vision for solving that?
I think that, unfortunately, as much as I'm optimistic about Israel's future, and I can tell you that after this war, Israel will go into a golden age. There will be peace agreements, and the economy here is already booming. It's going to boom much more. And baby boom. When I look at the diaspora, I'm not optimistic at all. I think that anti-Semitism is going to grow exponentially. We saw that before the 7th of October. It's not going to stop. It's going to get much, much worse. And on one hand, Israeli and the next Israeli government needs to really invest in defending Jews around the world. But at the same time, it's obvious that no matter how much Israel invests in it, we are very limited in what we can do in other countries. And I think that the next decade will be a decade of massive aliyah to Israel. You ask me what's the solution? Solution is Israel. I know it's hard to understand it and maybe harsh, what I say now. Diaspora is over. It's over. There is no future. 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, 40 years, one more generation, two more generations. When you look at two phenomena, the level of growing anti-Semitism globally, but also the huge amount we're losing people who are not staying inside Judaism. The combination of these two phenomena is lethal to the existence of the Jewish people. And the only future Jews have is in Israel. And I'm not saying they cannot have businesses all around the world. I'm not saying they cannot have a second apartment in New York or whatever. But I tell the Jewish people, have a stake in Israel. Even if you are not ready to make aliyah, have a stake in Israel. This is the future. And I think that Israel is not doing enough to facilitate aliyah. It's very hard to make aliyah. It's very hard to buy an apartment in Israel. The prices are very high. The dollar is very weak. It's not making things easier. We need to change our policies end to end. We need to go back to the basic Zionist idea of what we call in Hebrew kibbutz galuyot, bringing the Jews to the land of Israel. This is the future of the Jewish people. And we need a much more proactive approach from the Israeli government, but also from leaders, from Jewish leaders around the world, to start preparing for massive aliyah to Israel.
In a pragmatic sense, is there the infrastructure? Is it possible to create the infrastructure for Israel to absorb millions and millions of refugees from the diaspora?
Definitely. Just in Judea and Samaria, you can put 10 million. Negev, endless amount of area. North, doesn't all have to be in Jerusalem and Tel Aviv. It's time to expand. And even from a national security point of view, this is the most important thing for the future of Israel. It's about aliyah. There is nothing more important than aliyah to secure Israel and the Jewish people. And the more Jews will come, they will be secure. And the more Jews come, Israel will be secure. It's completely interconnected. And when we talk about fighting anti-Semitism, I think that the main thing we need to do is strengthen the Jews, reinvigorate the Jewish Zionist values. It's giving them the tools to to really fight, and you cannot fight if you don't have strong identity. To fight, you need an army. And many of the Jews around the world, they don't look to me like an army. Some of them are very strong and resolute, many are not. Many are disconnected from our core values. You cannot fight anti-Semitism if you are not a fighter. And to fight, you need spirit. And as I said, we need to go back to be heroes of our own story, not villains in our own story. We need to excite the Jewish people about who they are. Reconnect them to the story. We have the biggest story of all. We are the most amazing nation in the world. And we need to remember that. And many people forgot. It's time to, deal with remembering who we are as a nation. And it all starts with that. Because if you don't feel a hero, if you think you are a villain, what does it matter? Then, what you say. And this is why it's so important to keep our ethos and our story intact, And the story for many Jews has broken.
What was, in your 30 years of being involved in Israeli security, what is one thing that you got wrong? Is there anything that you have gotten wrong?
Well, I think that, I come originally from a Mapai family, Labor Party. In 1992, I voted for Rabin. We're a Labor Party. And then Oslo came. And from the moment Arafat gave his first speech in Gaza, I started feeling, something is not adding up. Something is wrong. But it took me more than 10 years to change, really, to really understand. It took me a long time. In the army, to really understand that I'm thinking, the wrong way, that I'm not understanding the extent of the terrible thing that is happening to us and the decision-making and so on. I think that only when I became a battalion commander in Operation Defensive Shield was the first time I really understood reality on the ground. My views, changed. But it was a long process, very long. For a long time, I wasn't looking right at things at all.
One piece of advice that you could give to diaspora Jews who are facing anti-Semitism, who are worried, who are in seeing this changing world. Is there one piece of advice, one little nugget you can give us?
I want to connect this advice to a short story. At the age of 16, because my father was a diplomat, we moved a lot, I lived in different places. At the age of 16, I arrived to an international school, a British international school. And in British school, it's like Harry Potter. You have houses that compete between each other all year long. And when I arrived to the school, I was new, Jew, Israeli. People studied there from grade 1. But the second year, when I was 17, they made me deputy house captain. And at the age of 18, I was house captain in my school. It's very rare for Jews to become house captains, certainly Israelis. So, I didn't think about it much back then, but later on I thought about it a lot. How can it be? Israeli, Jew, new, in 2 years becomes house captain. Now, I could have attributed it to the fact that maybe, I have natural leadership or I excelled in sports, but there was something else. And this is my message to the Jews. I was a very, very, very proud Jew in Israeli. And it reflected everywhere. And it's not that I didn't have debates. I had debates, I had discussions. It's an international school full of Arabs and British guys and Italians. There were many discussions. But I learned a very, very big lesson every Jew needs to understand. When you respect yourself and who you are and your heritage, people respect you. Even if they don't necessarily like you, they will respect you. And when Jews disrespect who they are, they will never be respected. You cannot be respected if you don't respect yourself. If you don't love yourself, nobody will love you. The first thing about, loving somebody, he needs to love himself. we need to go back to be heroes of our story. We are the most amazing nation on this globe. And we need to remember that. We have to be proud that we were born Jews. I thank every day God for making me a Jew. We have to remember that. And once you have this sense of proudness and connection and learn about your history and heritage and so on, this will project everywhere. Mm-hmm. And we have to unite. We have to unite around this basic Jewish Zionist vision. And when we are united, there is no force on this globe that can threaten us. We need to unite. And we can only unite through our basic values.
General Amir Avivi, thank you so much for joining me today.
My pleasure. Thank you. Thank you for having me.
So where does that leave us? Amir Avivi does not deal in comfortable answers. A country that has to hold the high ground to survive. A diaspora he believes has no long-term future. Millions of Jews coming home to a land 45 miles wide. You don't have to agree with every piece of it, but he earned the right to be taken seriously. Because he was right about the biggest thing when almost nobody else was. If there's one idea to carry out of this conversation, it's the one he kept returning to. That we have to go back to being the heroes of our own story instead of the villains in it. Whatever you make of his politics, that's worth sitting with. If this gave you something to chew on, do me a favor, subscribe wherever you're watching or listening on YouTube, Apple, or Spotify so you can never miss an episode. Leave us a rating and a review on Apple or Spotify. It genuinely helps new people find the show. And follow @HonestReporting on X, Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok. I'm Ben Chertoff. This is The Honest Take, and we'll see you next time.